Hi, thank you for joining us today and our weekly Facebook Live discussions or free consulting sessions where our three experts get together and talk about one section from a selected standard. Today's standard is the RIOS standard, the Recycling Industry Operational Standard, and it's targeted for organizations that recycle scrap metal. So as per our calendar, we are going to dive into the planning section today and talk about risks. So any thoughts before we jump in, Mike and Maya?
No.
Okay, here we go. Oh, can you make me, allow me to share my screen, please? Thank you. All right.
I'm so sorry. You know, it's always me. I'm always the common factor in delaying anything technology.
It's fine. Okay, so RIOS 2016, it all starts with risk. So in the planning section, the first thing that in the planning section that the standard requires is to identify the RIOS footprint. So I'm going to read from the standard, and it says that recyclers shall, sorry. Did someone say something or was that just me? Oh,
No.
Recyclers shall proactively identify and document their RIOS footprint to facilitate goals, controls, and monitoring consistent with their RIOS footprint. A, recyclers shall document the process for determining the RIOS footprint.
So this section starts out with the RIOS footprint. RIOS footprint means it's a combination of several different aspects. It's looking at your quality risk, your environmental impacts, your health and safety hazards and risk, as well as your legal and other regulatory requirements. So this is kind of all key, encompassing. The RIOS footprint is quite large, and it's a key aspect of the management system. So the first sentence, shall proactively. The proactive portion really comes down to the process-based approach. You know, if you follow a process-based approach, meaning that you're identifying the particular risk and opportunities from the respective activities and work based upon the plan, do, check, act model, you're going to be able to plan out your management system and not be always reactive to things. You're going to be proactive in order to put things in place, knowing what the risk and opportunities are and plan things accordingly to implement them properly. So this is what it's really talking about in the proactive portion, saying we need to follow the process-based approach in terms of identifying things prior to acting upon them and act with calculated accordance to what the risks are and what the opportunities are. So you have to identify and document. So this is a requirement, you know, the record that needs to be maintained per the management system. So the RIOS footprint, since it's such a key part of the standard, is going to be something that you use to facilitate your goals, so your objectives, your quality objectives. So you identify the quality risk, and based upon those things that might be higher risk, you're not only going to put controls in place, like create training or a procedure or try to mitigate it in any other method that might be appropriate for that particular type of risk, but you're also going to put some goals in place in order to monitor those things and make sure that you're achieving your goals that you adhere to as part of the identification of the RIOS footprint. So, and monitor those things. So this is, you know, your RIOS footprint is going to be the basis of your management system. You're going to create goals that are based off the important quality risk, the important environmental impacts, and the important health and safety hazards or risk. And you're gonna do those things in order to minimize your impact upon on the environment and on ill effects to worker health and safety, as well as improve customer satisfaction, quality of product, so on, or service. And that's going to be, this is really the key core foundation that you build your management system off of, and that kind of follows here.
So it's like a management planning process would be kind of what the process would look like in subsection A.
I mean, shall document the process for determining the RIOS footprint. So the RIOS footprint is going to be based off of quality risk, environmental health and safety impacts aspects, health and safety risk and hazards, as well as legal and other compliance. So you have to have a process for identifying those things. So you have to go through and look at each element in this footprint portion and determine what needs to be documented. This is just kind of giving you the high level approach that this process does need to be documented, because it's a very important and integral process to your entire RIOS management system.
Okay, Maya has her hand raised.
Yes, so I wanted to say that here, I'll take it out. I don't know how that works. So I wanted to say that first of all, what Mike said at the beginning, he's directly speaking to Plan, Do, Check, Act, right? So this is the first identification of the risk is the plan portion, which then it's going to funnel down into the controls, which are your do, and then check is your KPIs or your objectives, right? So Mike is straight upon it. And again, we are seeing where the management system, even though it's not ISO, it's following Plan, Do, Check, Act. In terms of documenting the process for determining the RIOS footprint, you can either have one process or procedure documented for this, or you can have 3 or 4, right? It all depends on the size of your organization and your resources. So let's say you are a smaller organization, you only have one resource who's managing all the implementation and driving the effort, then you can just have one simple process or procedure for this and a database where you keep all of these. However, for large organizations, especially with multiple sites, if you are a large global recycling operation, then it makes more sense for you to have a quality separate from your environmental, separate from your health and safety, because you probably have VPs for all of those areas, and then you're going to have implementers on each site for these. So again, depending on what is the scope of your organization, what is the size of your organization, what are the resources that you have, the number of documented processes to manage the planning portion as far as identifying the RIOS footprint, it all depends, and it really should be catered to that.
Right. Cool. Shall we go to the next slide? Cool. Okay. Okay, so B, the RIOS footprint shall consider the activities, products, and services of the recycler, including those of outside providers that can be influenced by the recycler, including but not limited to purchasing and acquisition of source material, on-site processing operations and activities, transportation, distribution, and delivery, and changes in operational processes, products, or equipment, both negative and positive impacts, actual and potential conditions, routine and non-routine activities, including emergencies, relevant stakeholder requirements and views, and legal requirements.
Wow, this is a lot of stuff here. So there's really a lot to
I don't know
unpack.
if you want to, I'm sorry, Mike, I don't know if you want to keep it up so that while we're discussing them, everybody can see them. Thank you, Asal.
Yeah.
Okay. But so as we spoke about while going through the RIOS read along, the RIOS standard is very dense. it's compact and it has a lot of information. So there's really a lot of stuff here. Each sentence needs a lot. You can take a lot from each respective sentence. So the footprint needs to consider all the activities, products, and services of the recycler. So that's, basically you needed your whole scope, right? Including those things that are outside services that you might have influence over. So first of all, where you're getting material from, purchasing and acquisition of source materials. So source materials in the RIOS standard essentially means, if you're a metal yard, who's giving you metal? Are you getting it from peddlers? Are you getting it from corporations? Or where are you getting it from? In the case of electronic recyclers, it's like, where are you sourcing your electronics from? So, the source materials is where you're getting your materials from. So it starts there, getting the materials, then what you do on site, transporting it to and from the customer site or the source material site to your location, and then to your customer or consuming facility, as the RIOS standard calls it. So there's so many things that need to be considered in this RIOS footprint. This is kind of going through looking at the negative and positive impacts. That kind of goes back to, again, the process-based approach and risk-based thinking, because this is really like the whole SWOT analysis, to looking at what are the risks, what are the opportunities, both from health and safety perspective, quality perspective, and then, when we think about both negative and positive impacts, usually that's talking about the environment, but it could be broader than just that. It can be something more actual and potential conditions. So that's kind of looking at some of like the emergency preparedness and response and various things here. So there's really a lot to unpack, but this is like a general statement, and then it gets into more detail when it goes into the next respective couple of slides. So I kind of want to move on because we're going to unpack them one by one as we go through. We'll revisit this. I'm not leaving this like this. We're going to move on and then take it as they come at the standard.
One quick question. Quick question. So would this kind of be like, when you're establishing your scope, these are all the things you need to think about to determine how wide of a breadth your RIOS management system is going to cover?
So remember, chapter 1 really covered the scope portion. So by this time, your scope is already established. But this is saying that in the footprint identification, which is going to cover some of the things that I've been talking about in terms of like quality risks, health and safety, environmental stuff like that, you need to consider your entire scope. So by this point, your scope should be established if you're going through and doing it according to the standard and according to the plan, do, check, act model. So you should have that established. And this is saying that when you're identifying, going to this next part of the planning stage of implementing your RIOS management system, these are the things to consider when looking at your footprint.
Okay. So the next section is subsection C. The RIOS footprint shall remain current, be reviewed at least annually, and be updated before planned changes to the system occur.
I'm going to say it again.
Stop here for a second.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this. This is like,
yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to say it again. Process-based approach. Because look, the footprint shall remain current, be reviewed at least annually, and be updated before planned changes to the system occur. So this again is saying that you need to follow the process-based approach, the plan, do, check, act, risk-based thinking and carefully calculating what are the things that we need to consider prior to planning this and implementing these things in place. What are the implications? And the footprint should be updated before plan changes to the system occurred. So what's called the management of change, meaning that when there's change in the organization, you're essentially creating a whole another spiral off of your existing plan, do, check, act model that needs to be controlled and honed in to the existing controls of your management system. So one of the things that must be considered when planning for changes or the management of change is the footprint, because it needs to be reviewed, and the process that's being added, the equipment that's being added, the changes to the equipment or whatever is being added, you need to think about what are the risks, what are the opportunities, how can this hurt somebody, what do we need to do to control it? You know, this section we're only talking about quality risks, but you know, obviously the whole entire RIOS footprint needs to be considered here. And so process-based approach is key and intricate to ISO 9001, 2015, 14001, 2015, 45001, 2018, as well as RIOS 2016. All of those things are built with that process-based approach. Whatever process, you know, the process-based approach. I'm getting tongue-tied here, but you know, they're built with to streamline the process-based approach.
Good job, Mike. Asal, before you have a question, I need to bring it in terms of like being blunt, okay? Most organizations, regardless whether you work with a consultant or you don't work with a consultant, fail at this year to year, quarter to quarter, month to month. The reason is because that you most likely have, if you're a recycling yard, you probably have a near miss. You probably have, however minor, maybe not recordable incident, right? So if that happens, you go to your footprint. You have to first see, did you identify risks associated with this near miss incident or an accident or customer complaint or a process that failed? This is number one step, like Mike said, and most companies fail at this. So there has to be a process that you have built this within. Again, if that means you have to create something else or another document like management of change or management directive or whatever it is, or integrate questions into your corrective actions, preventive action, incident reviews on like, do I need to revisit my footprint or check whether I have reviewed my footprint, yes or no? Those are the things you have to build in with your process in order for you not to fail this step.
That makes sense. Okay, so this is what people, our clients always ask me, how big does the change have to be for me to sit down and fill out this form that you've created for me? And I always say, this is my answer is, if you had to update any of your processes, procedures, forms, documentation, software, building, equipment, then definitely go ahead and fill that form out. So what is like your guys' responses to that type of question?
So I think the standard says that the management of change process should be implemented anytime that there's a change that can affect the integrity of the quality, environmental, or health and safety management system.
Yeah, but that's
so
like
that
a
means
broad term.
So that is the broad term. So what does that mean? So then you need to ask yourself, how can this affect quality? Does this, by this doing this little change, like, oh, I'm putting a extra, I don't know, something in like the storage room or something stupid like that. Obviously that doesn't do anything to quality, environment might do something to the environment, but who knows? You need to think like quality wise, is this gonna affect our ability to provide a service or product to our customer by implementing this change? Is it affecting the environment? Are there some disposal implications or some other type of environmental implications that come from this activity or, this change that's occurring? And are there any health and safety risks? Is there a way that somebody can get hurt because we're adding this, we're adding this process, or we're adding this machine, or taking it away, or changing something that you're doing? Usually when people ask the question, do I have to do this every time? Usually the answer is yes. But there could be instances where it's not applicable. But you need to ask yourself those key things. Does it affect those things? If it does, and affect the ability to maintain the integrity of the management system as it is, without not doing anything, then you don't need to do anything. But if it does affect quality, environmental health and safety, you need to go through the process.
If you don't mind me saying something in terms of this, like, when do I need to fill out this form you gave me of management of change, right? Then I step back and I kind of act like, okay, it's like we're pretty much, when we're writing the documentation, we're writing a thesis, we're building boundaries and the roadmap of what we're doing. And so when it comes to what do I need to document in management of change, then, for example, for documents, you may or may not have a different management system for your documentation, which is online, and it has already integrated document change orders, right? In that case, every time you change a document that's related to any management system you have, you have to go through the document change order process within that software. Or you're going to say that my management representative is going to handle all document changes and they're going to track it in my document master list. Whatever you decide, you put those boundaries on, right? So now if I have changes when it comes to with processes, then yes, absolutely. If I'm adding a process, a huge process that especially have to have a top management approval, that's going to be documented within my management planning. This is where you start your plan, do, check, act right away, right? But if I have something in terms of changing something as a result from a corrective action or from a incident, I would say within that document, you then ask a question whether additional change documentation or change management paperwork is required. Because in a sense, every time you do corrective action or incident assessment or any kind of environmental, if you have an environmental incident, right? Every single one of those involves a change. Right? Now, if you say that documenting this change here is enough, then you don't have to do it. So again, we're going back to these management standards are voluntary. Therefore, it's up to you, up to your organization to define your boundaries, and then you tell the auditor, these are my boundaries. Now, if there is an obvious process that you did not document that has changed and it has affected significant amount of people, changes, roles, facilities, equipment, well then, you're gonna get written up. But otherwise, it's up to you to define it.
Well, how you were saying that this is where people get the most nonconformities here, this section. I see a lot of nonconformities here in the plan changes section. Without fail, every year, there's been changes, significant changes sometimes, without any sort of management planning. So,
and again, I think that would be your implementation, effectiveness of training, or maybe the resources, those individuals who are responsible to kind of check on the implementation do not have ample amount of time to do so, right? And maybe instead of doing audits yearly when you find these things out, you do more frequent audits until you get it together.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation. That
because change, and I always talk about it as a cultural change, because it is an organizational cultural change, takes time. And in order for you to do that cultural change, you have to monitor and measure, right? You have to monitor and measure the implementation. And at the beginning, it's always required more often than later on.
Yeah. So quality risk, I'm actually going to skip to the next slide because it's the same wording, but this slide is a little bit bigger text. So the recycler shall identify risks to product and service quality. A, controls shall be planned and documented for each quality risk to manage the risk. B, controls shall be integrated in the RIOS management system, implemented and monitored for effectiveness. C, recyclers shall plan quality controls for the qualification of suppliers, outsourced providers, and customers where applicable, material and product tracking and traceability if required, and control of customer property if applicable.
So this starts off with recycler shall identify risk to product and service quality. So when we're talking about inbound, outbound, think about, you know, the product that you're sending to the consuming facility, in instances of like scrap metal and stuff like that, is the product that you're sending out. Whereas the service is like your source control. You're providing a service for a particular person that or company that's giving you material. So that's true most of the time. And then like in the electronics recycling, right? The service will be provided for the source material, like coming from the customer. You're getting their material. You're doing data sanitization of any stuff that has data on it, as well as maybe testing, reselling the material, and then the product going out, you know, in that instance would be used electronics. So the expectation of the consuming facility, which might be an end user on eBay or something like that, is that it's working and functional. So you have to identify what are the risks related to this? What are the risks related to not sending out a product that works as we're saying it works? You know, we're going to have bad customer ratings. So therefore, we need to identify these types of risks. What's going to be the thing if we send out bad scrap metal that's not properly sorted, that has a high level of contamination, that like mill is not going to want to work with us, or is going to ding us for our prices. You know, we're going to get a significant downgrade in material that we could have captured higher value if we had properly sorted it out, or have a process in place for identifying some of these risks. So you need to identify the risks that are related to quality of both the product and the service that you're providing as part of the scope of your management system. And controls shall be planned and documented for each quality risk to manage the risk. So it's very interesting because, you know, usually controls are only required for important risk or environmental impacts or health and safety hazards. But this says for each quality risk to manage the risk. So quality is of that much concern that you need to have a control in place for each quality risk to be able to manage that risk. So the control in place could be training, it could be a procedure, it could be some other like type of control that's appropriate for whatever that risk is. So in the instance we were talking about, not sending functioning electronics to the end user. So your controls in that instance would have a process in place for testing and verifying that the test methods are proper for the electronics that you are testing. before they go out, that they're actually working and functioning as intended, right? Something like that is appropriate. So here, the second part B, control shall be integrated into the RIOS management system, implemented and monitored for effectiveness. So that means like you're planning it, again, the process-based approach, right? Plan something, document it, do it, and then check it. Make sure that it's properly implemented and monitored for effectiveness. So that could be through like an objective, a KPI, some other method, through internal audits, through monthly reviews, so whatever is appropriate for your management system based upon several factors. What is the size of your organization? What kind of activities are you doing as part of your scope? So this is for you to determine what's appropriate in terms of the monitoring. And Recycler shall plan quality controls for qualification of suppliers. So, you know, make sure that you're getting good incoming source material, as well as outside providers, which could be consultants, could be contractors coming on site, somebody who helps with preventive maintenance of operational machinery, and customers. So that's the downstream, the consuming facility, the end user, the eBay customer, whatever. So that's considering all these things, where you're getting the material, what's done on site, and where it's going to. Material and product tracking and traceability if required. So in many instances, like in terms of the electronic recycling world, you'll want to see, you know, if stuff's is it tracked by a serial, especially for data bearing devices. You want to see there's the material that has specific like serial number or a IMEI, that there's a traceability, that the proper process has been put in place for that, as well as any other type of like metal yard or something like that. You'll still want to be able to track and know what type of inventory you have in place, like how much steel, copper, whatever other commodity, you know, so that you can properly track those things and know what you're processing and know what you have to send. That's all part of the customer or part of your ability to have a quality process in place and control of customer property if applicable. So that could be something, you know, where you have like a consignment of servers where you're doing the data wiping of all these server racks and then selling it to you know, a party down, you know, selling it to somebody after the data wipe and testing has been performed. But it's still the customer's property until that's done, and then you split the profits or do whatever, you know, your agreement is with them. So that's only if that's applicable. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. So you need to determine what are your controls for all of these things. So that's kind of the basis here for just one aspect of the footprint, quality risk.
So in terms of quality risks, I want to point out that because what Mike said, that the RIOS is asking you to plan and document for each quality risk and manage the risks. But I want to say that RIOS does a really good job of telling you where you should look for risks, because it tells you you need to document procedure for qualification of suppliers. So there must be risks related to suppliers. You must have had issues there. Outside providers, okay, so in terms of, like he said, preventive maintenance, so on and so forth, and customers. Risks with customers, of course you have risks with customers. Then of course with tracking and traceability, this is a big one, especially in scrap yards, right? And if you are not paying your supplier until you verify the type of material, because you need to process it in your laboratory, now your tracking and traceability of customer property, or really you have a risk of losing it because you don't want your supplier to go somewhere else and supply the metal because you are failing on tracking and traceability of their product prior to owning it yourself, right? So I think that when you're starting with quality risks and RIOS, you already have your job done for you. You just have to explain a little bit more how specific to your organization these things are.
And I think that's kind of the benefit of the RIO standard, right? It's the recycling industry operating standard. So this standard was built specifically for recyclers and has a little bit more detail and specificity that's related to the industry, whereas the ISO standards are generalized to apply to the most amount of organizations. You know, this one is very honed in on the niche industry, or, you know, not niche, but the recycling industry as a whole, you know, each respective part, whether it's, you know, plastic, electronic recycling, or metal or something else, you know, the thing is that this standard was built specifically for those types of operations. So it's very much giving you clues. This is how to follow the steps to properly implement a RIOS management system.
So I do have a question about the risk. So we do have a practice of kind of quantifying the risk to show that we've seriously considered it and analyzed it and considered the probability of occurrence, the magnitude of the effect it's going to have. And based on that, we implement additional controls if necessary, right? So because this standard says that you have to have a control for every risk that you've identified, does that mean that we can kind of take away that quantifying practice?
Well, usually we quantify the risk, and then the ones that are considered like significant or high risk are given a control. But in this instance, each quality risk has to have a control anyways. So scoring kind of doesn't matter to a certain extent because you have to treat each quality risk like it's important, significant, or high, and put a control in place in order to properly manage that risk.
Okay.
The only thing I would say, if you do, so the reason that we also apply the risk, whether or not you put on a control on it, is because then identifies you and takes you to not just the control you should and or whether your controls that you have are effective, but I think it also then narrows it down to what you should really be monitoring or measuring. Right? So now if we evaluate the quality risk and we give it, you know, whether, you know, if we just look at, you know, low, medium, high, and if we have high anywhere, right, that means we should probably have some kind of a metric for it, right? So I think quantifying the risk helps you shine a light or in areas that you should be working more in.
That makes sense. But so do you see how, well, where B it says for monitoring the effectiveness, does that applies to all the risks you've identified, right?
Controls shall be integrated in the RIOS management system, implemented and monitored for effectiveness. So
you monitor the controls.
Monitor the controls that are in place to make sure that they're effective controls to mitigate risk.
Okay.
And say technically, if we're really talking about in general monitoring the effectiveness, you can say and use your internal audits, your weekly walkthroughs, your customer complaints to monitor every single one of these, plus your environmental health and safety, right? Because at the end of the day, there are certain indicators, especially if it's customer satisfaction, as well as, for example, your profit and loss. And especially if, you know, your liabilities or the loss are related to your injury rate, then you already have these monitors that are going on and you have already had them in place before management standards, right? But what this leading you to really narrow down your metrics. So once you quantify that risk, then instead of just looking at customer satisfaction, then you're looking at actually dollar amounts of your claims, or you are actually looking at the customer retention, right? Or if we have serious problems with customer complaints as a result of supplier issues, then we have a metric to really know how to weed out those bad apples, right? So I think, sure, if I have to monitor every single one of my risks, what's the point of scoring them? But at the same time, if you do that, you can then section off or like narrow down the exact metrics so it's more effective.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Oh, we have more. Okay, 4.4, quality controls. A, product and service specifications and customer requirements shall be documented, approved, and changes controlled in the RIOS management system. Should I go on, or do you guys want to do?
No, so that's kind of, so product and service specifications are the stuff you're getting, the source material, right? You need to have defined what are the product specifications of the incoming material for you, or the service requirements of that. What needs to be done? Does it need to be data wiped? Does it need to be destroyed? Does this material need to be processed within 15 days? What are the specifications? Those need to be defined, as well as customer requirements. Like, what are the packaging requirements? What is the specification of the material that you're sending to them? Only A grade, or only this type of metal without any impurities, or stuff like that, or moisture. So those things all need to be defined in terms of what are the incoming material specification and outgoing material specification, and they need to be documented and approved. So whoever has authority to approve those things, and changes controlled. So again, when those changes occur, there's instances I've seen where packaging changes have occurred with a facility, but they didn't update their plan, or they didn't communicate it with the shipping department, and then they ended up not packaging it properly, and it got rejected, or there was some issues, they got some complaints from that. So there has to be a method in place for monitoring things, monitoring changes, and updating stuff as appropriate. So documented production and service instructions shall be provided to workers. So that's kind of like, once the material is on site, what are you doing to make sure that it's processed in the proper manner? Do you have work instructions or SOPs, standard operating procedures, to ensure that it's done with consistency? How are you making sure that it's done the same way according to the specifications, either for the incoming material or outgoing material, or a combination of both? It could be they have to consider both things, both the product and service specifications, as well as customer requirements when doing a job. So how are you communicating? How are you documenting it? So it's good, like, the ISO standards say, documented information to have the confidence that you're carrying on the system, but the RIO standards, like, no, document production and service instructions. They shall be provided to workers. So it's like, you need to have some work instructions and SOPs in place to tell people what is the approach to properly processing these things that are the defined requirements and specifications. And monitoring and measurement, again, right? Controls for quality shall be implemented at relevant points in the process. So what are you doing to ensure that this metal is free of contamination? Are you doing checks with some type of analyzer, or some type of magnet, or some whatever's appropriate? Or in terms of electronics, what are you doing to ensure that, like, there's no data? What's your method of validating that the data is removed? What's your data recovery attempts? What are the quality control mechanisms in place? How do you know that these electronics are given the appropriate grade, cosmetically, functional wise? So all of that stuff should be measured and monitored. And again, stuff like this can be measured and monitored in an internal audit, but you might want to have some also other more frequent quality checks depending on exactly what that process is. So like, for instance, like data wiping, having more than just once a year internal audit, the ability to check to verify that your data wiping software is working as intended and that there is no recoverable data. So depending on what it is, you need to have the proper monitoring and measurement controls in place and implemented at relevant points in the process.
And those can also come from client requirements as well as regulatory requirements. And the example that you just mentioned, if you are certifying to R2 V3, then there's specific requirements in there about the percentage of, for example, units.
Oh, there's so many many requirements in there.
Right.
So I just want to say that, actually R2 V3, right, still prescriptive, and our RIOS is kind of similar to that, but they take a very subtle yet loaded approach, because if I look at A, B, and C, I see in A, I see ISO 9001 8.2 and 8.4. 4.4b here on the slide, I see 4.4, 8.1, and 8.5, right? And then for C, 4.4. So I'm just like saying what are all these standards, right? So that might not mean much for everybody. But what I'm saying is, when we're looking to other standards, and they have all of these requirements in separate sections, and the requirements are very broad, right? So for example, but in RIOS, as well as R2 V3, very specific, but they use a little bit to say a lot. So if you are kind of confused and you think this is so simple, it can be very simple as long as you understand. But it's also might be beneficial for you to check out other standards to understand all of these different interactions.
Yeah.
Interactions. Yes. Yeah.
But like, as you were saying, that one sentence in this RIOS standard is equivalent to an entire section in an ISO standard.
Yeah.
2 sections, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that would be very beneficial. Go see what the under standard says and see what are the how you can have significant compliance to get your certification. Or that was going to be so good. Or you can contact us at Glenview Group. And we will get you a proposal and get you on your way. If you would like to head over to our website, which is glenviewgroup.com, you can go to our calendar page, sign up for a free consultation, and then we can talk to you more about your RIOS standard or your R2 standard or your combination RIOS R2 standard. Any closing thoughts, Mike and Maya?
No, I think it went over a lot, but I also want to say, if you actually want live help, you can join us during our webinars. We are taking a week off next week, but after that, we have consecutive 3 or 4 weeks going on. So again, if you want to, you can email us at info@glenviewgroup.com, or maybe on our Facebook page, we can put in the registration link and you can register and you can ask us questions live during these.
Yes. So thank you for watching. Please join us in a couple weeks. We will take a dive into health and safety risks next.
Or environmental aspects, or both.
Environmental aspects.
We'll see. Could be both.
We'll do both. All right.
All of it.
Bye.
All right. Bye.